Hello friends, I am Dr. Himanshu Sekhar. Today we will study about part 1 of urology lecture, kidney and ureters. The contents of this video are mostly based on Belly and Love and Surgery Essence by Pritesh Singh, and nearly all the questions which are there in Surgery Essence has been covered in this lecture. So first we will talk about the contents. In this video, we will study about renal calculi, their types, character, the clinical features, and the diagnosis and treatment. Then we will study about renal infections, in which we will cover xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis and emphysematous pyelonephritis. Then we will study about genitourinary tuberculosis, tumors, benign tumor and malignant, their features, management. Then we will study about Wilms tumor, renal trauma, ureteric trauma, and congenital anomalies of kidneys and ureters, their diagnosis, management, clinical features. Now coming to the renal stones. First, what are the types of renal stone? So renal stones are broadly divided into two types: calcium stones and non-calcium stones. Calcium stones are the most common renal stones. They are composed of calcium oxalates and also in ethylene glycol poisoning. Calcium stones occur whenever there is increased calcium in the blood or increased oxalate or increased uric acid or decreased citrate, because citrate is useful to bind the calcium. So whenever there is decrease in citrate, it causes increased calcium and it causes calcium stones or renal calcium deposits, which are also known as urolithiasis. So urolithiasis is stones in the urinary tract, and nephrocalcinosis is stones in the renal parenchyma. And nephrocalcinosis is because of increased parathyroid hormones or renal tubular acidosis. Now coming to the non-calcium stones, these are of many types. One is struvite or triple phosphate stone. Another one is uric acid stone, then cystine stone, xanthine stone, and indinavir stone. Now coming to the struvite stone, these are also known as triple phosphate stone because these are due to the presence of magnesium, aluminium, phosphate stones. So when we see this map, we can think of map of pelvic calyceal system. When we look at this X-ray image, we can see the outline of pelvic calyceal system is demonstrated by this large calculi. So this is also called as staghorn calculi. The cause of struvite calculi are urea splitting organism, which is most commonly Proteus. So whenever the Proteus splits urea, it forms ammonia, and ammonium is alkaline in nature. So this struvite stones, these are mostly formed in alkaline urine because of urea splitting organism and stasis of urine. Other stones are normally treated by alkalinization of urine, but this struvite stone is formed in alkaline urine. So we have to be careful about giving syrups containing bicarbonate, which are used for alkalinization of urine. Now coming to uric acid stones. These are the most common radiolucent stones, and these are formed in patients of gout or myeloproliferative disease. These patients are being treated with cytotoxic drugs. These cytotoxic drugs increases the uric acid concentration in blood. So these are treated by giving allopurinol and decreasing uric acid intake. Other non-calcium stones are cystine stone, xanthine stone, and tenofovir stone. Cystine stone are due to inborn error of metabolism in which cystine metabolism is impaired. Tenofovir is a protease inhibitor which is given in AIDS HIV treatment. Now coming to the clinical features of renal stones. So most of the renal stones present with pain, which is colicky. Colicky means it increases and decreases in frequency and lasts for few minutes. These are acute in onset and radiates to the groin. Radiation of this renal stone depend upon the level of renal stone impaction. So in this diagram we can see that there are 5 points of narrowing in the genitourinary tract. First is at the uretropelvic junction. Second is where ureter crosses this iliac artery. Third is where vas deferens is present near ureter. Fourth, when the ureter enters bladder wall. And fifth, narrowing is at the ureteric orifice. So at these points, stone is more likely to get impacted. First and second, these are called as proximal, and last three are known as distal impaction of stones. The pain of upper ureteric stone impaction, that is upper ureter, these are radiated towards testis in male and labia in female. Stone of mid ureter impaction is like that of appendicitis, and this is radiated towards McBurney's point. And pain of distal ureter is radiated towards the mid thigh portion or perineum. So mid is McBurney point like appendicitis, upper is at testis, and labia, we can remember that testis was intra-abdominal organ. So the pain of upper ureter is radiated to testis, and distal ureter mid thigh or perineum. Pain of ureteric calculi is most severe in oxalate stones. This is because of multiple spicules like projections in the oxalate stone, which is very painful. Besides pain, the vomiting and hematuria may also be present in renal stones. Hematuria is mostly microscopic, that is evident on the urinary examination under microscope. Another term is Daytal's crisis, in which there is triad of pain and swelling which disappears. This is because of impaction of stone in the urinary tract, which causes hydronephrosis or swelling, and when the stone passes, then this swelling disappears. Now coming to the diagnosis and management of renal stones. So for diagnosis, radiological investigations are X-ray, ultrasound, CT scan. X-ray of the kidney urinary bladder region are the initial investigation to be done. This is because of 90% of the kidney stones, these are radio opaque. So these are visualized on simple X-ray. The important point which should be noted is that both AP and lateral view is important, because in AP view, here we can see this is the rib cage outline and this is the stone which is below this rib cage. But this location can be confused with gallbladder stone also. So to differentiate this, we need a lateral view. In this we can see that these are the lumbar spines and this stone is present over the vertebral column. But if it was because of gallbladder, then it will be anterior to the vertebral column. So gallbladder stones are anterior to the vertebral column, but renal stones overlie the vertebral column. After X-ray, we proceed towards the ultrasound, because ultrasound can see whether there is obstruction of the urinary system, that is ureteric obstruction or hydronephrosis. Then we can also know about the size of stone, and other nearby structures can also be seen in ultrasound. Then CT KUB, which is important to know the details of stone and surrounding structure and any vascular anomalies. This can also be seen on the CT scan. Then we come towards the urinary microscopy, that is what will be the appearance of stones when seen under microscope. So this is also a frequently asked question. In this we can see that the calcium oxalate stones, they are enveloped or bipyramidal shape. So enveloped or bipyramidal shape. Then when we see calcium oxalate monohydrate, these are very hard stone monohydrate, and extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy is not useful because these stones cannot be broken by shock waves. In this we see that this is the dumbbell shaped stone. Then we see the brucite stones which are needle shaped, struvite stone, also triple phosphate stone or staghorn stone. When seen under microscope, they are like the coffin lid. They are like coffin lid. Then uric acid stones, these are multifaceted stones, irregular plate or rosette shaped stones. And last one are the cystine stones, which are hexagonal or benzene ring like stones. So when we look at this picture, this is the first one, bipyramidal stones. These are the calcium oxalate stones. Then multifaceted stones, these are the uric acid stones. This is the coffin lid like struvite stone and cystine stones. There are some stones which are not visible on X-ray, and these are called as radiolucent stones. So these can be remembered by this mnemonic TICSU. T for triempterine stone, I for indinavir stones, X for xanthine stones, and U for uric acid stone, which was the most common radiolucent stones. Now coming to the management part. First is medical management and then is surgical management. So there are some dietary modifications which are required, like increased fluid intake so that more urine is formed and which helps in evacuation of stone. For this diuretics are also given. along with increased fluid intake. Then there is decreased protein intake and decreased sodium intake. Calcium and oxalate are also reduced in dietary, but the calcium is moderately reduced. Besides the dietary modification, then some medical drugs to treat the underlying cause. As hypercalcemia was the causative factor for calcium stones, so when it is due to hyperparathyroid hormone secretion, then orthophosphates. These phosphates bind the calcium and increases the urinary clearance. When hypercalcemia is because of sarcoidosis, then corticosteroids are given. Hyperthyroidism is treated with antithyroid drugs which are propylthiouracil and carbimazole. Uric acid stones, which was because of increased uric acid formation due to cytotoxic drug and myeloproliferative disorder. So these are treated with allopurinol and potassium citrate, which causes the alkalinization of urine because uric acid is acidic, so we need to alkalinize the urine. Sodium bicarbonate also for alkalinization of urine. Then we see secondary hyperoxaluria. This is treated with cholestyramine, cystinuria. This is the which was causing the cystine stone due to inborn error of metabolism. This is treated with potassium citrate like this, sodium bicarbonate and D-penicillamine. There are some idiopathic causes in which the increased calcium is present but the cause is not there. So these are treated with diuretics to increase the urinary volume, which are thiazide diuretics, and also phosphates to bind the calcium. Then some drugs are also there which is given as medical expulsive therapy. So these help in expulsion of the stone. These expulsion can be done by decreasing the contractility of ureter. So if we give these alpha blockers, so alpha increases the tone, sympathetic tone. So when these alpha blockers are given, the muscles get relaxed. Also calcium channel blocker, these also act by decreasing the tone of ureter and dilates the ureter and helps in passage of stones. Besides this, NSAID are given, which are the drug of choice for pain relief, and steroids are given, which helps in decreasing the inflammation and edema. Then coming to the surgical management of stones. So surgical management is because of emergency and elective. Emergency, when there is a stone which is causing severe pain and obstruction with hydronephrosis or hydroureter and septic complication. So in this, before doing any intervention, we need to drain the urine. So for this, percutaneous nephrostomy is done, in which if this is the kidney and there is stone is impacted and this is the back pressure and hydronephrosis, hydroureter is there. This is the skin. So we put a drain via skin. This is called as percutaneous nephrostomy. Another is ureteric stone, in which under cystoscopic guidance we put a DJ, that is double J stone stent, and this DJ stent helps in passing the urine by bypassing this stone. Once the active phase is over. Then for elective surgical management of these stones, there are various methods to do this. First is ureterorhinoscopy, that means endoscopy, ureteroscopy and rhinoscopy. So via endoscopic route, ureter and kidneys both are evaluated. These are of three types: semi-rigid, flexible and RIRS. So semi-rigid advantage is that there are larger working channel and larger stones can be removed. Flexible, the advantage is that it can be reached up to the upper regions, but larger stones cannot be removed. And RIRS, that is retrograde intrarenal surgery. This is done when the stones are inside the kidney, and via this scope kidney stones are removed. Then other is percutaneous nephrolithotomy. This is the diagram of PCNL. So you can see this is the nephroscope and this is inserted via this percutaneous route from skin and directly in the dilated pelvic calyceal system, and this impacted stone is extracted under visual guidance. There are four types of PCNL. One is standard, then mini, then ultra mini and micro. In all these the size is decreasing, so the benefit is that the blood loss is decreasing, but more large stones cannot be removed. The contraindication of this PCNL is coagulation disorder. Large stones like Staghorn calculi, these are removed by the standard PCNL, and other can be removed by the mini, ultra mini and micro. The third one is ESWL, that is extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy. Extracorporeal matlab outside body, and shock wave lithotripsy, in which the shock waves, ultrasonic shock wave are given, and when these reach the stone, then the stone is fragmented into multiple pieces and then they get out via urine. There is a term called Steenstrasse, which is the street of stones. These are when there are multiple small stones in the urinary tract after ESWL. Contraindication of ESWL are: it is not done in pregnant and hemolytic disorder patient. Those were the endoscopic and minimal invasive and ultrasound treatment. Then there are non-endoscopic surgery, which is open, laparoscopic and robotic. Open, in which direct abdomen is opened, kidney are approached and the stones are removed. Then if it is done by minimal invasive laparoscopic surgery and also robotic surgery. When we are doing the ureteroscopic, that is endoscopic route, then to extract the stone there are multiple methods. One is basket extraction. So this is the diagram of Dormia basket, in which this is the scope. It when passes proximal to the stone, then this basket is opened up, and when it is pulled down, it takes stone with it. So this is called Dormia basket. Another are lithotripter. Lithotripter are the method to fragment the stones via endoscopic route: ultrasonographic, electrohydraulic and electrokinetic lithotripter. Then lithoclast. Lithoclast is mechanical fragmentation of stone. Then there are laser treatment also for stone, in which the most common used is holmium YAG laser. Now, what are the guidelines? That means what investigation, what method to be used to extract the stone depending upon the size and position of the stone. So, for the stone which are not in the lower pole of kidney, that means if this is the diagram of kidney and this is the lower pole of kidney, so these stones, they are difficult, that after even breaking down the stones by various methods, they don't get evacuated because of this difficult urinary drainage pathway. So, except lower pole stones, if the stone is more than 2 cm in size, these are mostly done by PCNL, and if it is less than 2 cm in size, these are done by extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy, RIRS and PCNL. So remember that 2 cm is the upper limit of shock wave lithotripsy. If the stones are more than 2 cm, then we have to do either percutaneous nephrolithotomy or open or laparoscopic surgery. For lower pole renal stones, if there is no contraindication to do the shock wave lithotripsy, then we do shock wave lithotripsy, and when after that there are small fragments, then percutaneously we can remove these small fragments, or via RIRS, that is intrarenal surgery, we can remove these stone fragments. When there is contraindication to extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy, then we have to do the PCNL. For the upper 2/3 ureter that is proximal to iliac crossing, then small stones can be removed with shock wave lithotripsy or ureteroscopic, or large stones are removed by URS and S2L WL. Distal ureter, that is, if this is the bladder and this is the opening of ureter, then distal, that is this stone, these are mostly preferred route is endoscopy. So via endoscopy you can remove these stones. Now coming to the renal infection, pyelonephritis is the infection of renal parenchyma with presence of gas, or parenchyma with perinephric tissue infection. Pyonephrosis is when pyelonephritis progresses and there is obstruction, then this obstructed fluid gets infected and becomes pus-filled space, and this becomes pyonephrosis. In perinephric abscess, the abscess is present in the cortical tissue, but these are mostly because of hematogenous spread to the renal cortex from infection other than this renal system. The emphysematous pyelonephritis is pyelonephritis with presence of gas, and xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis is pyelonephritis in a chronic kidney. The causative organism in emphysematous pyelonephritis is mostly E. coli, which is followed by Klebsiella, and these are most common in diabetic patients. Whereas the xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis, most common organism are Proteus, followed by E. coli, and almost always there is obstructed system, urinary system. So chronic organism infection causes this xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis, Proteus, obstructed system. Now coming to the tubercular infection of genitourinary tract. So these are mostly hematogenous, that means primary is almost always in lung, and from there hematogenous route genitourinary system is infected. Clinical feature, mostly these are asymptomatic. Sometimes patient presents with urinary tract infection and there is pyuria is present, but on microscopic examination pyuria is present, but culture is always sterile. So these are called as sterile pyuria. Sometimes the most common presentation is increased frequency of urine. This is because of irritation of bladder and ureter and also because of scarring, which is the most common method by which the tubercular infection heals. So when there is scarring and fibrosis, then the capacity of urinary bladder is decreased. So the frequency of urination is increased. Sometimes most common cause is increased frequency of urine, asymptomatic patients, sterile pyuria and UTI. These are the common features of genitourinary tuberculosis. Now, genitourinary tuberculosis can affect almost all urinary tract organs, that is kidneys, ureter, bladder, prostate, epididymis and testis. So, when the kidneys are infected, pathogenesis starts with glomeruli. So, first glomeruli are involved and then there is granulomas in the renal cortex. Then these form the abscess and they burst in the pelvic calyceal system. From this the urine is infected and then they reach the ureter. So the same pathology then involve the ureter. Then if this is the ureter, then whole of this ureter gets fibrosed and this gets thickened and this is known as pipe stem ureter. When the lower pole of ureter, this lower pole of ureter where the ureteric orifice is present, when this also get infected, that is inflammation reaches there, then on cystoscopic examination, if we see via this cystoscope, then we see that the opening is like a golf hole. So this is known as golf hole ureter. And as I told you that when the urinary bladder is involved, then after fibrosis and healing, the capacity of the urinary bladder is decreased and this is known as thimble bladder. Prostate is also involved sometimes and the epididymis and vas can also get involved. So epididymis is known as beading of epididymis, beading of vas and epididymal induration. These are present in the TB of epididymis and vas deferens. Testes are very rarely involved, but when they are involved, orchitis may be present. Now coming to the tests of genitourinary TB. So normal the routine test for tuberculosis, which are chest X-ray, ESR, sputum test, Montu test, PCR, CB naught, FB culture, etc. Then coming to the radiological test, chest X-ray to see the pulmonary tuberculosis, and also in X-ray QOB the calcification can be seen. Now coming to the intravenous pyelography. So there are multiple findings which can be present. These are the cavitatory lesion, stenosis because of fibrosis, and stricture when the fibrosis are progressed, the calcification which can also be seen on X-ray, and contractor bladder or thimble bladder. Moth eaten calyx on IVP is the earliest sign. The earliest sign is mouth-eaten calyx. Now coming to the management. First is the medical management, in which anti-tubercular treatment is given for the duration of 6 to 9 months. Coming to the surgical treatment, these depend upon the region which are involved and the symptoms. So ureteral dilatation can be done by endoscopic route, and the stricture which is present in ureter can be dilated to remove the obstruction. Pyeloplasty, which is the reconstruction of uretero-pelvic junction, which we will read about in detail later, can also be done. Ureter reconstruction can also be done. The techniques of this ureteral reconstruction we will also read about in detail after. But some names I would like to mention. So ureteric reconstruction can be done by Sowas-Hitch method, Boari flap method, interposition with Bowel, Politano-Lead method, Lich-Grogoit technique. These are some of the methods to do the ureteral reconstruction. Augmentation or substitution is augmentation and substitution cystoplasty. This is done for thimble bladder when the capacity is very small. So in augmentation cystoplasty, this urinary bladder which is small, so this portion is resected and ilium loop or bowel loop is augmented here, so that the capacity of urinary bladder is increased. In substitution cystoplasty, whole of this bladder is removed and new bladder is formed with bowel, that is ileum, mostly ileum. Nephroureterectomy, in which the kidney and ureter are removed. This is done when there is irreversible damage to the kidneys and renal function tests, so that the kidney is not viable and non-functioning. Partial nephrectomy can also be done when there is localized abscess and that segment is dead, so that kidney part is removed. This is called as partial nephrectomy. Now coming to the hydronephrosis, this is aseptic dilatation of kidney which is due to obstruction of outflow of urine. The causes of hydronephrosis can be intraluminal when the cause is within the lumen, intramural, that is within the wall of urinary tract, and extramural, that is outside the urinary tract and causes the compression of lumen of urinary tract. Most common intraluminal causes are the calculus or stones. Intramural causes are pelviureteric junction, PUJ obstruction, ureterocele, inflammation, and strictures. Extraluminal, these causes are retroperitoneal fibrosis, when the fibrosis is outside the peritoneum and ureters are compressed because of fibrosis. Other causes are, beside fibrosis, retrocaval ureter. About this retrocaval ureter we will talk about later. And also BPH or prostatic carcinoma, which when the prostate compresses the urinary tract from outside. Now the hydronephrosis can be unilateral or bilateral. So in this diagram, if the obstruction is at the urethral meatus level or because of prostate, that is, or stricture in urethra, any cause of bladder outlet obstruction causes bilateral hydronephrosis. Also, posterior urethral valves, which are mostly bilateral, these cause bilateral hydronephrosis. And when the cause of obstruction is beyond this bladder and single ureters or kidneys are involved, then the unilateral hydronephrosis is there. So all the causes can be remembered with this theme, that are tumors or inflammation, neoplasm. That is T for trauma, trauma at any level, kidney, ureter, bladder or urethra level, inflammation at any level, and neoplasm at any level. Now coming to the diagnosis and management, USG is done to see the extraluminal, intraluminal, luminal and extramural causes, excretion urography, isotope renography and Whittaker test. In excretion urography, dye is inserted in the blood and it reaches kidney and then gets excreted, and whole pelvic aerial calyceal system and urinary tract, this gets enhanced, and an X-ray is done which is known as excretion urography. So this is done at different time and depending upon this different phase, that is the renal uptake phase, glomerular filtration phase and excretion phase. In isotope renography, the isotope, which is radio labeled isotope, is given IV and also three phases, that is renal uptake phase, which depend upon the blood supply or vascularity, then renal concentration or glomerular concentration phase, in which filtration of blood occurs and the isotope is formed in the urine, and then the excretion phase. So all these three phases, isotope can be detected by detector cameras. These are most commonly gamma cameras. So there are three types of this isotope renography: DTPA, DMSA and MAG3. So DTPA is most commonly used, and this is done to see the perfusion of kidneys. Which kidney is perfused, how much. DMSA as for to see the structure of kidneys. These can also be used to see the scar tissue, that is previous renal surgery. And then the third one is MAG3. These are done when there are DTPA or DMSA cannot be done because the renal failure or increased urea creatinine level. So MAG3 can be done in these cases. Then there is Whittaker test. About this Whittaker test, we will study in UJ obstruction. Now coming to the treatment, first we have to treat the underlying cause. Then in acute obstruction with sepsis or hydronephrosis, we need to do percutaneous nephrostomy for urgent decompression or urethral stenting. Dilatation can be done after this acute phase is over. Urethral dilatation, urethral dilatation, these are done depending upon the level of obstruction which is causing this hydronephrosis. Now coming to the renal tumors. First, benign tumor. In this, the angiomyolipoma is the most common benign tumor. Angio means blood vessel, myo means muscle, and lipoma means fat. So these are the benign tumors which are composed of adipose tissue, muscles, and thick-walled blood vessels. CT scan is very investigation of choice and also diagnostic because heterogeneous appearance with fat is present in CT scan, and there is lack of calcification in this benign angiomyolipoma. Clinical features can be of mass, hematuria, pain, and there are questions which come on central stellate scar. Central stellate scar on radiology are present in renal oncocytoma, fibrolamellar HCC, focal nodular hyperplasia, and serous cystadenoma. These FNH and fibrolamellar HCCs are benign tumor of liver. Renal oncocytoma is benign tumor of kidney, and serous cystadenoma are benign tumor of pancreas. For treatment, for asymptomatic, we don't have to do anything. Conservative management will be done, and for surgical intervention, the 4 cm is the cutoff. So if a patient which is asymptomatic but 4 cm, then that should undergo surgical intervention, or any patient symptomatic should undergo surgical intervention. So what is the surgical intervention? Partial or total nephrectomy. That means the involved portion of the kidney, or if the tumor is large, more than 4 cm, then total nephrectomy is done. Now coming to the malignant tumors of kidney, these are also known as renal cell carcinoma. So there are many types of renal cell carcinoma. First is clear cell carcinoma, then papillary, chromophobe, collecting duct or Bellini, and medullary cell carcinoma. So clear cell carcinoma are the most common tumors and mostly arises from proximal convoluted tubules. These are also present in von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, and most of the tumors of von Hippel-Lindau syndrome are bilateral, and also VHL is due to gene abnormality, gene defect on chromosome 3. So clear cell contains glycogen, lipid, and these are well differentiated cells. Now coming to the papillary cell tumors. So papillary cell tumor are having papillary growth pattern, that is any outgrowth from the epithelium is papillary growth or tubular growth. Then anywhere, whenever this term papillary comes, then there is psammoma bodies are present in kidney or in thyroid, anywhere. The papillary tumors are due to MET gene defect which are present on chromosome number 7. These papillary tumors are also multifocal, bilateral, and common in cystic diseases of kidney, about which we will read after some time. Now coming to the chromophobe variant of renal cell carcinoma. So chromophobe variants are having a perinuclear halo, which are asked in question, perinuclear halo, prominent cytoplasmic membrane, and eosinophilic tail cells. Also, whenever there is term which is plant-like cell structure, this is referred to chromophobe tumors. These are the having best prognosis, and multiple chromosome loss are present. Hypodiploid is also there in all renal cell carcinomas. Then coming to the collecting duct tumors, these are aggressive tumors having hobnail pattern for MCQ, having desmoplastic reaction, and these are the rarest of malignant RCC tumor. Last one is medullary cell carcinoma, which is originated from medulla of kidney, and these are exclusively present in sickle cell traits. Now coming to the clinical features. Clinical feature of renal tumors are triad of pain, palpable lump and gross hematuria. This is present only in 10% and this is also very late presentation. Besides that, weight loss, varicocele and lower limb edema can be there. Weight loss is due to cacaxin or any which is present in any cancer. Varicocele, which is most commonly on left RCC. Cause of varicocele in left side is because that left renal artery, left renal vein. So this gonadal vein on left side drains into left renal vein, and when renal cell carcinoma progresses in renal vein, then this area gets obstructed, and due to this back pressure the varicocele are present. Then lower limb edema is also due to the when this tumor involves IVC also, then the venous drainage from lower limb is impaired and lower limb edema is also present. Besides these, other clinical features are of paraneoplastic syndrome. So paraneoplastic syndrome are due to the metabolites which are released from renal cell carcinoma and having different effect. So the common paraneoplastic syndromes are increased ESR, which is the most common. Then polycythemia. Polycythemia is because of ectopic secretion of erythropoietin hormone. Then hypertension is because of increased renin secretion. Then anemia, which is because of hematuria and chronic disease. Then hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia is due to insulin-like substance or insulin. Then Cushing's. This is due to ectopic adrenocorticotropic hormone secretion, ACTH. Then hypercalcemia. Hypercalcemia is due to ectopic parathyroid hormone secretion. Gynecomastia, amenorrhea, reduced libido, these are due to ectopic gonadotropin secretions. And Stauffer syndrome. Stauffer syndrome is non-metastatic hepatic dysfunction, so in which the liver function tests are based, that is increased ALP, increased bilirubin, and this is due to increased production of interleukin 6. Now coming to the staging, which is the in T4, the tumor invades beyond Girota's fascia, that is into ipsilateral adrenal gland. Now coming to the N, that is lymph node status. only N0 and N1. N0 no lymphatic involvement and N1 regional lymph nodes are involved. M that is distant metastasis N0, M0 no distant metastasis, and in M1 metastasis is present. Now coming to the investigations and management part. Radiological investigations like CCT, USG, MRI, these are done for staging. Urine cytology and culture is done 3 consecutive days. 3 consecutive days morning urine sample is sent for cytology, and as the abnormal cells can be seen in urine cytology. Culture is done to see if there is any infection is there, and UTI to treat the cause of that organism. Then blood count is done to see the normal status of patient, hemoglobin level and PET cell volume, and in paraneoplastic syndrome polycythemia can be seen. Besides that, liver function test, KFT, kidney function test, electrolyte, calcium, these are also checked. Then staging CCT, bone scan is done when there is increased ALP and patient is having complaint of bone pain to see bone mates. Then Doppler ultrasound is done to see the renal vein involvement or IVC involvement. So the thrombus, when the thrombus is present, then it can be detected in Doppler. MRI is also done to see the staging and surrounding tissue assessment. Then angiography is done when we need to do the partial nephrectomy, and in partial nephrectomy we need to see the vasculature of the involved kidney. So the angiography is done. Then isotope scan is done to see the contralateral kidney function, because when the contralateral normal kidney function is not good and deranged, then total nephrectomy cannot be done and partial nephrectomy or other treatment option will be considered. Now coming to the surgical management, partial nephrectomy. Partial nephrectomy is done in T1 tumor, mostly T1A, that is less than 4 cm, up to 7 cm can be done, but this is the absolute indications of partial nephrectomy are single functioning kidney in which the tumor is present, and the contralateral bilateral tumors, and in any tumor like von Hippel-Lindau syndrome associated, in which the bilateral tumors are more present and there are possibility of second kidney involvement later. This can be done with open approach or laparoscopic approach. Open approach can be transperitoneal, in which abdomen is open and peritoneal dissection is done, and other approach is retroperitoneal approach. Both of these approaches can be done laparoscopically also. The lymph nodes which are removed in radical nephrectomy are hilar lymph node and ventral group lymph node. There is no indication of extended lymphadenectomy, as it don't give any survival benefit and morbidity is increased. There is no role of adjuvant chemotherapy in localized disease. But in metastatic diseases, adjuvant chemotherapy can be given. When the tumor is localized, then there are alternative treatment strategies besides surgical treatment, which are renal artery embolization, in which the renal artery which is feeding the tumor is embolized and then the tumor shrinks in size. Active surveillance can also be done for small tumors, because some tumors are found to regress over time also. Then cryosurgery also can be done, in which nephron sparing surgery, that is partial nephrectomy, is done by minimal invasive approach using cryosurgery, so decreasing temperature to kill the tumor cells. Then high intensity focused ultrasonography, high intensity focused ultrasonography. This is also a method to kill the tumor cell by using ultrasonographic beam. Then image guided percutaneous radiofrequency ablation, in which under radiological imaging, radiofrequency ablation is done of tumor cell. Radiotherapy and immunotherapy. In immunotherapy, interleukin 2 and interferon alpha, they are done to kill the tumor cells. Now coming to the Wilms tumor. So Wilms tumor is the most common primary malignant renal tumor of childhood. The most common differential diagnosis of Wilms tumor is neuroblastoma. Neuroblastoma is the most common malignancy of infancy, and most common extracranial solid tumor, most common abdominal malignancy. But the Wilms tumor is most common renal tumor in childhood, not infancy. Besides that, brain tumors are the most common solid tumors of childhood, and this is in cranium, but the most common extracranial solid tumor in children was neuroblastoma. And most common cancer of childhood is leukemia, followed by brain tumors. So the presentation of Wilms tumor is triad of abdominal lump, microscopic hematuria, and fever. There are many associated malformations, that is Weger. Weger stands for Wilms, anuridia, gonadal defects, and mental retardation. Weger syndrome is due to WT1 gene mutation at chromosome 13. After Weger, the another one is Dennis-Dress syndrome, in which there is gonadal dysgenesis, renal failure. Another syndrome is Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, in which there is hemihypertrophy and enlargement of body organs. Now coming to the diagnosis of Wilms. Diagnosis is done by ultrasonography or MRI or CT abdomen. Calcification is also present in Wilms tumor, which is detected on radiology. Treatment for asymptomatic tumors. Also, when the diagnosis is done prenatally, then radical nephrectomy is the treatment of choice, because if the treatment is done before 1 year, then it is good prognosis. After nephrectomy, post-operative radiation and chemotherapy is given when the histology is unfavorable. And the post-op radiation should be started within 10 days of surgery, and post-op chemo should be started within 5 days of surgery. Pre-op chemotherapy is also given, but it is done when there is solitary kidney. So by pre-op chemotherapy, we want to decrease the tumor size so that instead of radical nephrectomy, partial nephrectomy can be done, or when there is bilateral Wilms tumor or in tumor in horseshoe kidney. Metastasis can also be present. Most commonly it is to the lungs, and after that it is to the bone. When the lungs have metastasis, then lung irradiation can be done for lung mets. Prognosis of Wilms tumor depend more on histology than stage. So most prognostic factor is histology. Now the questions has been asked on staging system of Wilms. So only two names to be remembered. When the staging system is for pre-chemo, that is before chemotherapy at the time of surgery, and when it is post-chemo, that is neoadjuvant chemotherapy has been given and during the time of surgery staging is done. So pre-chemotherapy, National Wilms Tumor Staging Group NWPSG, and post-chemotherapy, International Society of Ped Oncology. So international ped is post of chemotherapy and national Wilms staging is pre of chemotherapy. Now there are some tumors of renal pelvis, that is the kidney and ureter junction, this pelvis. So the pelvis tumors are mostly transitional cell carcinoma and steeple sign or goblet sign is present. So this diagram shows the steeple sign, in which this is the level of obstruction, and below the level of obstruction also the ureters are dilated. So this is called as steeple sign or goblet sign. The treatment is radical nephroureterectomy, that is complete kidney is removed with involved ureter is also removed. Now coming to the renal injury. So kidneys are the most common organ in genitourinary tract which are involved in trauma. Mostly it is due to blunt trauma, polytrauma, that is motor vehicle accident. The most common feature is hematuria, and besides that blood loss leading to hemodynamic instability, abdominal distension due to hemoperitoneum. Now, in any trauma management, we have to follow ATLS guidelines, which is A, B, C, D. A for airway and breathing. So we have to maintain the patient's airway and breathing. Then C for circulation. After the airway and breathing has been secured, then for circulation we put IV cannula and we give IV fluids, and if the patient is not improving, then we give blood, and even after this resuscitation, if the patient is not getting hemodynamically stable, then we operate the patient. D for disability, that is GCS. So any trauma patient will be evaluated by this guideline. When the patient is stable, FAST is done, and in FAST perinephric fluid collection can be present, which suggests the trauma to kidneys are present. When the FAST is positive, FAST means focused assessment by sonography in trauma. When the FAST is positive and patient is stable, then we can do the CECT. So the CECT staging of renal trauma is given. So renal trauma is divided into grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In grade 1, microscopic hematuria is present, urologic studies are normal and non-expanding subcapsular hematoma is present. In grade 2, non-expanding perirenal. In grade 1, it was subcapsular hematoma. In grade 2, it is perirenal hematoma and it is confined to retroperitoneum. And if there is laceration, then it is less than 1 cm parenchymal depth without urine extravasation. In grade 3, the laceration is more than 1 cm. In grade 4, laceration reaches till the collecting system or the main renal artery or vein is injured, but the hemorrhage is contained. And in grade 5, the kidney is completely shattered, renal hilum is avulsed. So, grade 1 to 3 can be managed with conservative. Grade 4 can also be managed conservatively, but in hemodynamically unstable patients, operation is required, and in grade 5, mostly surgical intervention is required. Now coming to the congenital renal anomalies. So the kidney anomalies can be classified based on the abnormalities in number of kidneys, rotation, ascent, fusion and cystic disorder. So when the kidneys are more than the normal, that is not 2 kidneys, one on each side, then it is supernumerary kidneys. Supernumerary kidneys. When one kidney is absent, then it is unilateral renal agenesis, and when both side kidneys is absent, then it is bilateral renal agenesis, and bilateral renal agenesis is incompatible with life. So in bilateral renal agenesis, there is Potter phases with oliguria. So neonates ingest amniotic fluid and the urine which is forms amniotic fluid. So if there is bilateral renal agenesis, the urine is not formed and amniotic fluid is not present. So there is not much space and not much fluid for baby in utero. So the phases is typical, which are prominent canthus, hypertelorism, that is wide gap in between both eyes, recessive chin because of uterus compression, the chin cannot develop, and the low set ears. So these are the Potter phases which is present in bilateral renal agenesis. Now coming to the rotation deformity, these are incomplete rotation, hyperrotation and reverse rotation. So the fetal kidney faces its hilum and pelvis anteriorly. So if these are the fetal kidneys, so hilum and pelvis are anteriorly and these undergo medial rotation and these comes medially. So if there is rotation defect and incomplete rotation, then anterior hilum is present. If the hyperrotation is there, that means the hilum will be posterior or dorsally and more laterally. And if the instead of medial rotation, if there is lateral rotation, then the hilum is present laterally. So these are the rotation defects. Now coming to the ascent defect. Kidneys develop at pelvic level and then they ascend to reach their normal adult position at the level of L3, T12 to L3. So when the ascent is abnormal, so one kidney can go to the normal side and other kidney can go to the contralateral side, and this is called as ectopic or contralateral kidney. When the ascent is insufficient, then the kidney may remain to the pelvis and not reach the abdomen, and when the ascent is excessive, then it reaches in the thoracic cavity and called as thoracic kidney. When the defect of fusion is there, so when the incomplete fusion is there, then it becomes horseshoe kidney, and in complete fusion it becomes fused pelvic kidney or cake kidney. And lastly, there are cystic disorders of kidneys in which cysts are present in the either cortex or in the medulla, that is cortical renal cyst, medullary cystic kidney, and autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease or autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease. Now coming to the horseshoe kidney, which is the fusion abnormality, incomplete fusion abnormality. So lower pole of kidneys are fused and the ascent was prevented by this inferior mesenteric artery, which is at the level of L3 to L4. Radiologically, there is flower vase or hand joining sign. So this is the flower vase or hand joining sign. The clinical features of horseshoe kidney is usually asymptomatic, but ureteral obstruction is also common. Lower calyx is reversed. So normally the lower calyx is coming in this direction, but here the direction of lower calyx is reversed. Surgery is not always required, and isthmus may contain aberrant vessels, so isthmectomy is not always done. Coming to the cystic diseases of renal parenchyma, first is cortical cysts, in which in the cortex area the cyst is present. So these are classified as Bosnack classification, which is USG classification. So Bosnack classification is 1, 2, 2F, 3 and 4. In 1 there is thin wall around the cyst and there is no septations. In Bosnack 2 there is thin septation is present but there is no enhancement. In 2F multiple thin septations are present. Multiple thin septations are present, but there is calcification, and which is hyperdense calcification on CT. So in this, either we have to do ultrasonographic or CT scan follow up. In class 3, the septations are also thick and there is nodule is present. So this is suspicious and there is chance of malignancy, so partial nephrectomy is done. And in class 4 Bosnack, which is clearly malignant, there is solid mass with cystic space. So in cyst there is solid space, solid mass is present. So partial or total nephrectomy is done as malignant conversion rate are high. So this was about the cortical cyst. Coming to the medullary cystic kidney or medullary sponge kidney. So in this the medulla is involved, dilated, which is radiologically seen as bristles on brush or bouquet of flower appearance on IVP. Dilated ducts are seen as bristles on brush and calcifications are seen as bristles of flower. These are also benign and present after 20 years or may be asymptomatic. The clinical features are colics, UTI or hematuria. Now coming to the polycystic kidney disease. In these, the cyst is present in cortex as well as medulla. So the adult polycystic kidney disease are autosomal dominant and present at 3rd to 4th decade of life, bilateral or may be asymptomatic. Polycystic kidney disease of infancy or childhood are autosomal recessive and patient dies. So it is not compatible with life. Adult polycystic kidney disease are two types, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is due to genetic defect in chromosome 16 and type 2 is due to genetic defect in chromosome 4. The presentation of polycystic kidney disease asymptomatic or in 3rd to 4th day, there is gross enlargement of kidney, so there is palpable lump with hematuria. Renal failure may also be present. The conditions which are associated with polycystic kidney disease are hepatic cysts, which are present in up to 50% of patients. Splenic cyst and pancreatic cyst may also be present, but lung cysts are absent. Cerebral aneurysm or belly aneurysm can also be present in the polycystic kidney disease. Mitral valve prolapse, hypertension and proteinuria less than 2 gram per day. These are also the associated conditions of polycystic kidney disease. Now coming to the IVP, that is intravenous pyelography appearance of polycystic kidney disease. So there are different cysts. So the spider leg appearance is there in IVP. Now coming to the congenital anomalies of ureter, duplex renal pelvis and ureter. In this you can see here the pelvis is duplicated on left side. So this is double pelvis, and here ureter is duplicated. So this is double ureter on left side. So the most common congenital anomalies of upper urinary tract are duplication of ureter, but the most common congenital anomalies of genitourinary tract is vesicoureteric reflux. Now coming to ectopic ureter, that is in this diagram we can see this is the normal ureter and this is the ectopic ureter. So the ectopic ureter normally drains the upper pole of kidney. In male it opens in the posterior urethra and in female it opens in the vestibule. But in males it don't cause incontinence of urine because of external sphincter. But in female there is continuous dribbling of urine. So in a patient with urinary continence, that is patient can avoid urine by her will, but continuous dribbling of urine is caused by ectopic ureter. So there is Wiegert-Mayer's law which is used in ectopic ureter as well as duplication of ureter, which says that lower ureter is open in bladder at lateral aspect. So in this diagram you can see that when there is upper ureter, see this is the upper ureter and it reaches the medial and near the bladder neck, and if there is lower ureter, then it will open lateral to the normal ureter, and when the upper ureter is there, it reaches the medial near bladder. So lower ureter lateral opening, upper ureter medial opening near bladder. This is the Wiegert-Mayer's law applicable on ectopic ureter as well as duplication of ureter. Now coming to the retrocaval ureter. A retrocaval ureter is due to persistent posterior cardinal vein. Normally ureter passes lateral to the IVC, but in retrocaval ureter the ureter passes behind the inferior vena cava. So inferior vena cava compresses the ureter, and this appearance of reverse J or fish hook or Shepherd crook deformity is present in IVP. Now the last topic is ureterocele. So in ureterocele, the intramural ureter. So this is the ureter, and this is the bladder, and this is the bladder wall. So the intramural part is dilated. This is due to the ureter opening which is having ectasia. So proximal to the ureter opening there is dilatation, and this dilatation when seen on this X-ray, so the treatment of choice is endoscopic diathermy. So via ureteroscopic the ureteric orifice is diathermized and the obstruction is relieved. Now vesicoureteric reflux. Vesicoureteric reflux is reflux of urine from urinary bladder into ureter. So this can be asymptomatic or it can cause recurrent UTI, and this is also autosomal dominant. So the classification of this vesicoureteric reflux is international classification, which is divided into 5 grades: grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. In grade 1 on IVP with micturating cystourethrogram, so the dye is instilled in the bladder, and when the patient urinates, if there is incompetence at vesicoureteric junction, then the direct dye will go from bladder to urethra. So in level 1 contrast appears but the ureters are not dilated. In grade 2 contrast appears till the renal pelvis and calyces. So till the renal pelvis and calyces the contrast is present but without dilatation. In grade 3 mild to moderate dilatation is present but minimal blunting of the fornices. In grade 4 ureter tortuosity and dilatation is present, and in grade 5 it is megaureter. So complete dilatation with calyceal blunting is present. So this is the vesicoureteric reflux classification. Management of vesicoureteric reflux is grade 1 to 3. Pre-pubertal children, after puberty spontaneous resolution can occur. So medical management is given, or in unilateral grade 4 medical management is given. In this antibiotic, that is ampicillin or amoxicillin, but the antibiotic of choice is cotrimoxazole, and when the hepatic maturity, so that cotrimoxazole can be metabolized in liver is occurred, then cotrimoxazole is given. And the surgical management is uretrovesicoplasty or ureteric reimplantation, that is the ureter which is dilated and affected is reconstructed by this method of Lich-Gruber and Politano-Leadbetter. The other method is sting, which is subureteric transurethral injection of Teflon paste, in which Teflon is injected at the ureteric vesicular junction so that reflux don't occur. Now PUJ obstruction. This is the kidney, this is the renal pelvis, and this is ureter. So this PUJ is when obstructed. This is called PUJ obstruction. Most common cause. This is the most common cause of fetal hydronephrosis. The causes can be congenital, which is because of aperistalsis segment. So the peristalsis is not present at this level, or there is aberrant renal vessel. So there is a renal vessel which is aberrant and process the ureter at this level and obstruct the ureter. So the hydronephrosis is there and PUJ obstruction is there. When the causes are acquired, these are because of calculus or instrumentation or infection. There are some common associated anomalies which are present with PUG obstruction, and these are contralateral PUG obstruction may be present, vesico-ureteric reflux may be present, or Vater deflux, that is vertebral anomalies, anorectal malformation, tracheoesophagus fistula, and renal defects. PUG obstruction in presentation, it can be asymptomatic or it can present as a palpable mass, or in prenatal ultrasound also it can be detected. The investigation, DTPA to see the perfusion. Whitaker's test. Whitaker test is done by the percutaneous nephrostomy tube is inserted here and fluid is given, and the pressure in this system, renal pelvis system and the bladder, is measured. So in case of PUJ obstruction, pressure in the renal pelvis is increased in relation to bladder. So this is called as Whitaker test, in which percutaneous nephrostomy tube is inserted and fluid is given and differential pressure in between pelvis and bladder is measured. Other is retrograde pyelogram, in which fluid is given retrogradely and the fluid don't reaches the level of obstruction, don't cross the level of obstruction. So this is retrograde pyelogram. The treatment is conservative for asymptomatic, and for symptomatic patient pyeloplasty is done. So pyeloplasty, when due to PUG obstruction the diameter of ureter, distal and proximal pelvis, these are different in diameter. So in dismembered, the strictured or defected segment is removed and there is a spatula is made in this ureter and this anastomosis is done. So this is called dismembered, when this segment was removed and then pyeloplasty was done. And when this segment is not removed, it is called non-dismembered pyeloplasty. And besides the open method of pyeloplasty, endoscopic method can also be done, which are endopyelotomy, in which via the endoscopic ureter is reached and this incision is given in this region which was strictured, that is called endopyelotomy. Then balloon dilatation, in which balloon is inserted and deflated at the